Okay, wow. That material you sent over, especially that first story, it really hit me. David and Svea flood.
Mm,
Young couple, missionaries, they go into the Belgian Congo,
yeah,
full of hope,
absolutely. Idealistic, ready to serve.
and they just get rejected completely. The village wants nothing to do with them.
It's brutal. They end up building their own place, but then the real tragedy hits.
Svea has their daughter, Ina, and just, what, 17 days later?
17 days, malaria, she dies. It's just devastating. You start reading and think this is just failure from the get-go.
Right. It feels hopeless. They poured everything in, faced hostility, this immense loss. And David, in his grief, I mean, it's hard to blame him, but
He makes a choice, a really hard one. He leaves Ina, the baby, with other missionaries and just goes back to Sweden.
feeling like it was all for nothing, like God had just, left him there.
Exactly. Understandable despair.
So Ina, who gets renamed Aggie, grows up in the States with these other missionaries, doesn't really know this whole backstory.
Right. Until decades later, somehow, this Swedish Christian magazine shows up.
With a picture of a grave, Svea Flood's grave.
Can you imagine? That one photo just kicks off this whole journey for her to find out who she was, where she came from. It really makes you think about these, like, invisible connections.
Totally. So she goes to Sweden, right, to confront her father. Must have been incredibly painful.
Oh, I'm sure. Years of silence, grief, probably guilt on his part.
But then the twist. London. A layover.
Yeah, just a coincidence, seemingly. They end up at this mission convention, and Aggie meets this man, Ruhigita Ngora.
And this is where my jaw just dropped. Ruhikita.
Yeah,
He was a boy in that same village.
the very one. He used to bring the floods, eggs, chickens, little things like that.
And he tells Aggie, her mother, Svea,
Svea led him to Jesus, that one boy.
just him initially.
Yeah.
But because of that one act, that one connection Svea made despite everything.
The entire village eventually came to follow Christ. They honor David and Svea's memory now. It's
It
unbelievable.
just flips the whole narrative. What looked like total, utter failure.
Was actually the seed, the one that had to, like it says in John, fall and die to produce this huge harvest. We so rarely see the full picture, you know?
Wow. And then Aggie, her husband, and her father, David, they reconcile. He finds out his sacrifice wasn't meaningless after all these years, finds his way back.
It's an incredible story. And while, yeah, it's dramatic, uniquely tragic in ways.
It really does surface all these questions, doesn't it? The real practical things people face when they think about mission work. Maybe you, listening right now, are grappling with some of this.
Exactly. It's not just some abstract idea. It involves your life. Are you single? In a relationship? Got kids? What about your parents, your family? It touches everything.
So that's our mission for this deep dive. We want to unpack some of those practical, personal things. What do people actually consider? We'll draw on experiences, advice from missionaries themselves, single couple, kids, worried parents. Let's get into it.
Okay, let's start with serving single. It's a path many take, some really influential figures, actually. You think about Paul in 1 Corinthians.
Right? He kind of encourages it, doesn't he? For undistracted devotion.
He does. And others, like John Stott, made that choice too. The idea is that singleness can allow for maybe a more focused kind of service.
And there seem to be real practical advantages, too, like Melinda's story in Central Asia.
Tell us about that.
Well, she felt her singleness let her just immerse herself. She lived with a local family, basically became their daughter, experienced life from the inside out in a way that might be harder if you had a spouse, kids.
That makes sense. That level of integration,
Yeah.
it could open doors, right?
Yeah.
Especially thinking back to the floods being so isolated initially, singleness might actually help break down some barriers.
Yeah, more flexibility maybe,
Yeah.
your schedule, where you live.
Yeah.
You can weave yourself into the community differently.
Exactly. And Jessie, serving in Mexico, she put it bluntly, single women can feel free to serve God above all. The focus is just different than when you have family responsibilities.
And Jesse mentioned this too, and it's a big one for many single women thinking about missions. What about marriage?
Ah, yes. The desire is often still there.
And the stats you shared suggest it can be, well, challenging on the field. Fewer single men, guys marrying earlier. So how do you hold that desire alongside the calling?
It's a real tension. Jack Volkel's advice was pretty direct. You have to surrender that desire to God. Trust his plan, his presence, his provision, even if a spouse isn't part of that specific picture he has for you.
It's about prioritizing the call, fundamentally.
Right. Trusting he knows what you need deep down.
And Bob's story here is Pretty amazing. She wrestled with it, read a book called Single and Satisfied. Apparently wasn't sure she wanted to be satisfied.
Relatable, I'm sure.
But she worked through it, surrendered the desire, and then literally 3 weeks later.
Meets Jerry, her future husband, also a missionary. It's not that trusting God means giving up hope, but maybe releasing the control over how it happens.
Exactly. Letting him work. Now, Monica's experience kind of echoes that. She thought she needed a partner first.
But God advised suggesting, well, if you want a mission-minded spouse, maybe the mission field is the place to find one.
Right, so she went single. Admits there are times she'd love a partner, but trust God to equip her. Kimberly, Heather, similar stories. Step out in faith first.
It seems the core message is, take the step. Go. Trust God will provide what you need, potentially including a spouse, if that's his plan.
Okay, but practically, being single overseas, loneliness, isolation, those support networks from home aren't there.
That's huge. Catherine, up in Alaska, she really stressed intentionally building that relationship with God first, but also strong same-sex friendships.
And she warned against leaning too heavily on male colleagues for that core emotional support.
Yeah, just to avoid potential, complications or misunderstandings. Wisdom there. And Lisa, who served all over, she talked about proactively building family.
Like with other missionaries, locals.
Yeah.
Creating that sense of belonging.
Precisely. Which, again, you think of the floods, they needed that. Lisa's honest, though. Those relationships change. People move. It hurts.
The goodbyes are hard.
But she says the connection, while it lasts, is worth the eventual pain. And she advises thinking about your personality, your support needs, when choosing where to go. Some places might offer more community than others.
That's good practical advice. Okay, let's shift gears. Another big one. Parents or grandparents. Telling your loved ones you want to become a missionary. That doesn't always go over well.
No, it definitely doesn't. Apprehension, opposition, it can be really tough, emotionally taxing when it comes from your parents. So what helps bridge that gap?
Well, Jennifer in West Africa had some ideas like be proactive, help them see the good side, maybe invite missionaries over, share stories of the impact.
Demystify it a bit, address the fears about, poverty or danger.
Exactly, and patience. Maybe start smaller local outreach, short-term trips, build understanding gradually.
Barbell's story was powerful here. Her dad wasn't even a Christian, had paid for her education.
And you'd expect resistance, right?
Totally. But he became a huge supporter. Her mom had doubts initially, but visiting the ministry changed everything for her. Sometimes seeing it firsthand makes all the difference.
It really does. And David Smith's point is comforting too. Trust God to care for your parents while you obey the call.
Yeah, he saw his own parents come to faith eventually. And he mentioned practical things like mission agencies often having policies for leave to care for aging parents.
That helps address those what-if questions. Good to know those supports exist.
And for those facing really strong disapproval, there are networks, like the National Network of Parents of Missionaries. Find others who've walked that road can be, really helpful.
Okay, now, a really sensitive one. What if one spouse feels the call strongly, but the other isn't interested or is even against it? That feels like a minefield.
It is a very delicate balance. The material really stresses both views have to be heard, respected.
Stacy's story was interesting. She initially did not want to go overseas.
Right. But her heart changed over time. She prayed, trusted God with all her worries. Bible school, kids, adoption, her parents' reactions.
So it can change. But Craig's point seems crucial too.
What was that again?
That for overseas service together to work well, you ideally need both people feeling like 100% called to it.
Ah, yes. If one person feels dragged along or resentful, that puts huge strain on the marriage, the ministry, everything.
But he also said it's not necessarily go overseas or do nothing.
Right. There are tons of ways to serve in missions together without relocating internationally. Church mission boards, short-term trips, supporting others financially or practically, hosting missionaries.
Finding that shared path that works for both is key. It's not all or nothing.
Exactly. Healthy partnership in ministry.
Okay, moving on.
Yeah.
Something I know a lot of people wonder about. Small kids. Can you really go to the mission field with little ones? The answer seems to be a definite yes.
Oh, absolutely. Loud and clear from the sources. Elizabeth, who is an MK herself.
Okay, missionary kid.
Right. She actually said it's often easier when they're young. More adaptable, pick up languages quicker.
Makes sense. And she mentioned things like nannies or childcare being available in some places, which helps parents balance ministry and family.
And Dick's point was fascinating. Kids can actually be ministry assets.
How so?
They open doors. People are drawn to kids. They can connect with locals, even reach people who might be resistant to a more direct approach. Kids are kind of universal bridge builders.
I could see that. There's a natural connection point there.
And Dale Pugh's research is really encouraging. He found missionary kids often thrive. They become bicultural, multilingual, often very successful later on. It counters that worry that you're somehow disadvantaging them.
Jack Volkel summed up the advantages well. Adaptability, language learning ease, avoiding uprooting older kids with established lives, and that universal baby appeal we mentioned. It seems younger can often mean smoother, at least initially.
But, of course, if you have kids, the big question is school. What are the options when you're overseas?
Yeah, the resources laid out about 4 main paths. First, national schools total immersion.
Okay, intense, but maybe great for culture and language.
Then you've got mission schools or international schools.
Yeah.
Often high academic standards, maybe more familiar.
Right. Then boarding school is another option.
Which could be in the country or even back home. A big decision, that one.
For sure.
Yeah.
And lastly,
homeschooling, which seems increasingly common for missionary families.
and David Smith from WC said their approach is basically parents deciding with input from leaders on the field, focusing on what's best for the child's effectiveness.
And families might mix and match, right?
Right.
Start with homeschool, maybe switch later.
Seems common. John pointed out the best choice depends on so much money, what's available locally, family philosophy, and, crucially, the kid's own needs and learning style.
And no matter what, they often become these unique third culture kids, right? Blending influences.
Exactly. And that study in Evangelical Missions Quarterly is reassuring, finding MKs often do really well educationally, socially, spiritually. They're resilient.
We saw that in the examples. Tom's son in Slovak schools, then wanting a boarding school for Christian friends later.
And Paul being homeschooled himself, then sending his kids to local Spanish schools in Colombia. Kids adapt.
Jack Vogel's advice to check an agency's values on education before joining seems smart. Make sure you're aligned.
Definitely. Good point.
Okay, but what about when the kids aren't small? Teenagers. Moving with teens feels like a whole different ballgame.
Oh, it is. They have established lives, friendships, identities tied to where they are. Much harder to uproot.
Char had some really grounded principles here. First, you can't succeed as a missionary by failing as a parent.
Foundational. Family first.
And second, while she believes God calls the whole family, if your teenager is really strongly resisting.
That might be a sign. A check on timing, maybe motives.
Yeah. She basically said, don't risk creating deep resentment or bitterness in your teen just to push through your calling right then. If they're dead set against it, maybe it's wiser to wait until they're older, more independent.
That's really compassionate advice. Thinking long-term about the relationship.
Okay, one last scenario. Your kids are adults, but maybe still need support in some ways. Can you still go then?
Jerry and Robin face this. Kids in late teens, early 20s. Their key takeaway. You absolutely need your adult kids' full, unconditional support.
And you have to be intentional about staying connected across the miles.
Right. And they said it depends on the kind of dependence, financial, emotional, spiritual. And get confirmation not just from the kids, but from your pastor, mentors too.
There, interestingly for them, the distance actually seemed to deepen the relationship sometimes.
Yeah. Maybe more intentional communication, more appreciation. It can work.
So wrapping this all up, it feels like the main takeaway is just how multifaceted this decision is. Serving in mission, single or family, it touches every part of life.
Totally. So many personal, practical things to weigh. The stories, the advice we looked at, they all point back to needing God's guidance, really trusting Him to provide.
And really thoughtfully considering everyone involved, their needs, their concerns.
Exactly.
And for me, going back to the floods, that aha moment is seeing how something that looked like such a tragedy, such loss,
became the catalyst for something huge, unexpected.
Yeah, like that seed analogy. It had to fall, seemingly disappear, for that amazing harvest to come later. The path might be hard, full of challenges, but the impact can be way beyond what you initially imagine.
Which leads to a good question for you listening right now to maybe chew on. This idea that obeying that nudge, that calling, even when it's unclear or faces pushback,
Right.
it could unlock a much bigger story.
A story you can't see the end of yet.
Right. So what little seeds of faith of wanting to serve might be in you, just waiting for the right time, the right soil. It's worth exploring, what your part in that bigger narrative might be.